In today's economy, more people than ever are looking to buy and sell businesses. But how do you do it? Welcome to The Deal Board, presented by Transworld Business Advisors. Straight talk about real deals and real people. Listen to stories, interviews, and expert advice to help your business sale, merger, or acquisition process. Now, here are your business exit experts, Andy and JT.
Hey, everybody, you've landed on The Deal Board by Transworld Business Advisors and hosted by myself, yours truly, JT Jim Tatum. Glad to have you here today. And I am joined by Kelly Lise Murray. Kelly, thanks for being here.
Thank you, JT.
Very, very exciting. We've got a very interesting topic. You know, we do a lot of dealing with sellers who are ready to buy, ready to sell, and buyers who are ready to buy. And occasionally we wind up with the seller who is selling, and during that process, some personal or family-oriented things come up like divorce, which is what our topic is going to be today. Or sometimes we get approached by a seller who's about to go through a divorce looking for either valuation or, hey, I'm going to need to sell this thing and we're going to need to split it. And there you have some expertise in this, if I understand correctly.
Absolutely. So my name is Kelly Lise Murray. I have degrees from Stanford University and Harvard Law School. I retired after 18 years as law faculty at Vanderbilt University, and I have focused my legal scholarship on wealth dispute resolution and enforcement of family dispute results. And so business assets in a divorce is right within my wheelhouse.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, we're going to kind of dive in today for those of you who are joining us on the Deal Board and talking about what courts do that Transworld does on the Deal Board. How do we help people with the sale? But we're also going to talk about what courts do that Transworld doesn't necessarily do. Some of the things that the courts are going to consider that we don't consider, or how they may even be at odds with one another as you go through the divorce proceedings. So I think the difference here for us is that there are some critical insights, Kelly, that hopefully our listeners will walk away with today. If they or someone that they know is going through a divorce, is about to go through a divorce, and there's a business involved, what are some of the things that they need to do or consider to make sure that it's as smooth, if that's possible, transition as possible?
Well, just like in a sale, it depends on the documents. You really need to get your documents together, and hopefully your business records are where you want them to be for someone else to be looking at them, someone else's accountant, the judge. But the things to keep in mind is when you're selling, you're trying to find that one buyer. When you're divorcing, you have extra eyes on those documents. And those extra eyes are your spouse, the spouse that you're divorcing, and the team on that side. So that could be a lawyer, that side could have a financial professional, an accountant. They could have a business valuation done. And then ultimately the court is looking at it, and the judge has a lot of discretion. So you want to put all your effort into the trial level, the first round, because on appeal, the appellate court can only look at evidence in the record from the trial level. And that trial court has a lot of discretion. So on appeal, the standard's called abuse of discretion. It's really hard to prove abuse of discretion. The trial court makes a decision based on hardly any evidence or only lopsided evidence, that's going to be difficult to overturn. So put your effort in at the beginning. And of course, you can also go to mediation where you wouldn't need a judge and you aren't required to bring documents, but how on earth are you going to negotiate a business if you're not bringing any documents?
Yeah. You don't want to leave it up to interpretation or what someone else comes to the party with as their information. You want to bring all that documentation with you. So if I understand, Kelly, you're nationally recognized as a legal scholar. You work on wealth dispute resolution in family matters like this, featuring business valuations, retirement assets, real estate. I mean, that's a heck of a pedigree for yourself to be carrying. You must have seen some really interesting scenarios, which hopefully we can talk about some of the case law and things that you've encountered over the course of how many years you've been practicing now?
Well, I've had my law license for over 34 years, and I focused on this topic for almost 18 years.
Got it.
And I've taught thousands of judges and lawyers and financial professionals, and then thousands more real estate professionals and mortgage professionals, and of course, folks like you thinking about these issues.
Right.
And so what I've done is turn some of that continue professional education into a podcast. So I have the Wealth Litigated podcast where I deep
Excellent.
dive on a case. So today we're going to be talking about takeaways for the listeners where you
Yes.
don't necessarily need to know the cases, but some of these cases are crazy. And one that comes to mind is a Texas business where it was a startup about 2 years before the divorce. Husband was the main person working the business, and his negotiation strategy was, I will stop working on this unless we settle the business issues. So it puts the other spouse between a rock and a hard place.
Sure.
Well, shortly after the divorce, the business is now worth 9 figures. It goes from
He went back to
60,000 a
work.
year to 9 figures. He took a calculating spreadsheet in the real estate industry and turned it into software, and he was able to
Wow.
get investment, and so maybe that was part of the reason why he divorced. We don't know from the case,
Right.
but the enforcement litigation, she had to file after divorce to enforce the business assets, the business amounts she was supposed to receive. He didn't give her anything. He didn't do anything he was supposed to do. They had a 2-week trial. She borrowed
Oh my
$500,000 from her family. So you see where this is going. It is
Yeah.
so much better to get it right the first time and not borrow hundreds of thousands of dollars from your family to even defend. So even if
They have to go
you know,
fight.
he happened to be worth a tremendous amount after, but there was no guarantee. Just like
Right.
anything, you have a startup, it's difficult to value, it's difficult to sell early on. And so that's just an example of things going haywire. But there are other specifics that we're going to get into based on these sort of topics you should be thinking about. You need it if you're thinking about selling. Valuation process is the same. But
Always, yes.
I understand that a lot of your listeners don't pay for a business appraisal, and you don't have to do that in divorce. You just have to be smart with the evidence that you do have.
Gotcha. Well, and why this matters is you think about the percentage of the divorce rate today. 40 to 50% of American marriages are ending in divorce. That's terrible for what it does in a family. But most of those business owners, many of those folks are business owners. And so they're affected by this because the divorce rate continues, as we said, 40 to 50%, 50% for what they call the gray divorces. And then those are folks that are 50 years or older. And then it's tripled for folks that get into 62 plus. Those are the silver divorces. I'd never heard either of those terms before. Thankfully, I can't count myself among those ranks. So yes, that's an incredible stat.
It is. And if you think about it, what's the earning power and what's the value of a business for age 50 plus or age 62 plus?
Right.
Okay. So this is right in the deal board's audience.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and like you said, it's interesting. So there's a couple different pieces that we want to tackle here. You've got the kind of the valuation battlefield. There's a methodology here, and there's a preference that we use when we're selling a business. Joe or Susie comes to us and says, hey, it's time for me to retire. Help me bring it to market. Help me determine the market value. Then you've got, we'll talk about the weight of evidence, which was what you've talked up or brought up here just a minute ago. What are we bringing to the table when we're on either side of that divorce? If you're the seller, if you're the owner who's selling, and the spouse who's saying, well, what piece of that am I going to get? And then the evidence that they wind up using the business valuation in court, because that's really what's driving the value or the final number, and whether or not they're going to split it, or should they sell it before, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then the last two pieces were timing. When is the business valued for a divorce? And then the fifth piece is like, what are some of the strategic considerations that we should be talking about? So let's start with the valuation piece. In our world, whether it's a Main Street business, a mom and pop business, it's a middle market size business, there's at least kind of the two different methodologies, or at least the two numbers people are looking at, which is EBITDA in the larger businesses. Typically, we see that at $1 million or more enterprise and the sale price, or what we call SDE, that seller's discretionary earnings, which is kind of like EBITDA plus an owner's comp and maybe some add backs. What are you seeing happen in the divorce side of things when we're looking at just selling a business between Joe and Susie? It's one buyer, it's one value. It's very market oriented. Is that necessarily the case in a divorce?
What happens is the judge is if you're going to trial. So there are two ways to resolve your business valuation and business division dispute in a divorce. You can settle, you go to mediation with a neutral, and the neutral will ask you to bring evidence about your business valuation, but it's not required. And then court, where if you're going to court and there's a divorce trial, you really should have evidence and you really should have a lawyer. And so the difference is there in the cases that I'm able to see what people actually litigate. It means someone was unhappy after the divorce and that person appealed. So we're looking at appellate cases that tell us what happened at the trial level. And definitely 1 million plus businesses, the valuations you mentioned are absolutely in the case law, but none of that's required. So if we go between the range of mom and pop up to $1 million, it really depends on what you're doing. So my first recommendation based on looking at the cases is, how would you personally choose to value it? You know, you're working with Transworld and you're getting your valuation that way. Then you have to look at what the other side does in reaction to your evidence. So divorce is not unlike a sale where it's one business and one strategy, you know, a coordinated strategy, working with Transworld, all of that makes sense. But in divorce, you have to react. So they're asking you in the divorce process, give us all the business valuation documents you have. You have to produce those to the other side. Then you have to look at what they do with it. Are they paying for a business appraisal? Or are they simply hiring an accountant or other financial professional? And based on that, you need to react, because I have cases where the business was valued. It was the wife's business. Husband had a marital share. She presented evidence worth $10 million and he presented zero evidence, zero. And the court relied on her evidence. Well, that's bulletproof on appeal. So it could be $1 million. It could be 300,000. If only one spouse presents any evidence of the business and the other doesn't present rebuttal evidence, countervailing evidence, for example, tax returns. If it's all based on tax returns and the other one doesn't investigate the tax returns to identify some interesting accounting measures, so to speak, then the court can and will probably rely on the lopsided evidence. And because the appellate level to reverse it would be an abuse of discretion. It doesn't mean the appellate court agrees with the trial court. Just means, well, based on what the trial court had in front of it, this is a reasonable result. Well, we're not going to touch it.
Yeah,
so you've got to be careful at the trial level.
It looks like 10 million wins. Yeah, that's well, and
with
it's interesting.
No evidence at all is going to lose. Okay, so there are very few guarantees, but if one spouse presents zero evidence, that's unlikely, and that's why you have to be watching what the other side does and react to it.
Yeah, because in the world of the lower middle market, and even in some of those Main Street businesses, oftentimes we will be working with the seller and provide what's called a broker opinion of value. Now, that's not a certified valuation. It's here's market comparables. Here's what the asset value of your company. Here's the revenue. Here's a percentage or a multiple of what your SDE or EBITDA is. And here's your most probable selling price. There's a range that we'll typically be presenting to the seller. But when you have a buyout or you have a partnership or you have a divorce, you're probably going to need a certified valuation at that point, not just an opinion. Would that be true?
It would be better. You don't have to. So yes.
Yes.
And the highest level of evidence is always better. But just from what you mentioned, I have some cases where the court was looking at comparables from different locations at different times. That goes to the weight of the evidence, meaning how much the court will rely on it, but it doesn't go to admissibility. So the argument on appeal was, hey, this, 10 states away from us 3 years ago is not relevant to the sale, the valuation of my business. It is admissible as evidence. It just may not have the highest weight as something closer, a medical practice versus a gear shop. Okay, those are not comparable. So, and that's why whatever evidence you present, you can start with where you want to start. You're looking at what the other side does.
Got it.
Because the court is limited to evidence admitted into the record. And here's how evidence is admissible. It has to be relevant and reliable. And the same thing with the house, which is another big asset. People try to use those automated numbers. Well, that's relevant. It's not reliable. And every court that's ever been presented with it rejects it. But actual business records may be enough if the other side doesn't do anything to oppose what you presented.
So, and there's kind of two pieces there. Like, I think I heard you say you can present it, but the court's not bound by that expert opinion to say,
correct.
Well, we have to use that number. They don't have to do that. The court can decide otherwise. as you just said, it could be comparables, one that's really not reliable or one that's not relevant. It's reliable, but it's not here. It's way over there.
Right. And so it would be lower.
And they would weight it less, is what I heard you say.
Yes, that's correct.
Got it. And in the divorce court, if you have 2 or 3 different brokers or 3 different what we call CVAs, certified valuation analysts, they're looking at all the same data. They're going to probably come up pretty close. That might not necessarily be true if you have 2 different experts in a divorce proceeding.
Right, especially if you have lawyers involved, because the lawyers may box the experts in to not give them everything. And that's how, if there are 2 experts, each spouse's team gets to cross-examine those experts, gets to look at the basis of the opinion. What methodology did they use? What documents did they look at? What are their comparables? And attack every piece of that besides attacking the credentials. So in court, lawyers would always attack their credentials, but also the actual basis for the opinion, methodology, all of that. But what judges can do, that trial level discretion, the judge in most states can't average it. Wouldn't that be terrible? Well, there are 2 numbers. They're wildly apart. Let's just average them.
Let's find the middle.
In most states, that would be mathematically unreliable and not allowed. But the court can pick a number in between. You know what I call that? Picking a number. And that's the valuation of your business for the purposes of your divorce.
Wow.
And your equalizing of all the other assets. So you really don't want that. So if you have a valuation that you want and the other side wants it to be much higher or wants it to be much lower, and the judge just picks a number in the middle, you could end up with a lot less of your house equity or some other offsetting asset based on that number.
Okay.
So agreeing with your spouse would be best, right? Not spending extra resources on battling over the business valuation. That would be best. And you know what's even the best evidence that judges love? The actual sale. The actual sale of any asset is the best evidence of the fair market value.
So in that case, then would it be considerable, worth considering for the folks that are in this particular situation, go through with the sale rather than dispute what it's worth and then hope that, okay, well, we've agreed that it's, worth X, let's call it $10 million, like the example that you gave earlier. And then in that example, if they agree that it's worth $10 million, then the judge is going to determine, okay, well, here's what needs to happen. Like, does one partner have to buy the other out at that point? Or what does that look like?
Right. So at mediation, generally, you can agree to the value of any significant asset. And if you agree, that is a binding contract and the judge can't change that number. That was the first piece.
Okay.
If you can't agree to how to divide it or how to offset. So in that scenario, one option would be offset. Let's say the business is worth $300,000. I'm about to do apples to oranges, but the business is worth $300,000, we think, and the house equity looks like it's $300,000. Now, an actual financial profession would tell you that's apples to oranges without looking at the differences in depreciation and tax treatment and all of that. But if you can get to those, you can get the apples to apples comparison, then you could offset. If you wanted to keep the business, your spouse keeps more of the house equity. So now you don't need to go get financing to buy out your spouse.
Got it.
And so that's why you want to put all of it on, look at all of it, what's available. What do you want to do with the business? If you were thinking of selling anyway, selling is best.
Yes.
Courts love the sale of any major asset, selling the house, selling the business. Now we know what it's worth. But many aren't ready to sell or aren't working with Transworld, so aren't even in the process. But selling is always best. If you're thinking about selling, going ahead and selling is probably something to seriously consider. Because think about what you're going to spend in legal fees and financial fees and expert fees if the other side is now disagreeing with your evidence and disagreeing with your number and wants it higher, wants it lower. Right. So you've got to look at your net, and your net is all of those costs of fighting versus coming to an agreement based on
first. Right.
Right.
Well, and in each scenario, obviously, is always going to be different, Kelly. Right. So if I've got a business where the husband and wife are both actively involved in it and they don't agree to sell it and they divorce and settle, and one of them is now leaving, what's the impact on the business going to be? Because that person may have been an integral part of the day-to-day operations. Now you have to replace them. There's going to be a consequence of that, an impact, a ripple.
Courts absolutely don't want divorced spouses still owning and working in a business together.
I
They
don't think
don't.
this
They
is
want you to
first-
be financially divorced, and that
Yeah.
would not be financially divorced.
No, and
And
I
you're
don't think
absolutely
those
right.
divorced spouses are going to want the other one working in the business after it either.
Right. Well, there's a famous tax case called Pierce, where the husband and wife, the court, it's amazing. The court gives all of the entrepreneurial efforts of the husband that failed, and then they turned into a pay zero but just pay shipping business that allegedly knocked off other products. I mean, that was the business. And so when they divorced, it changed the valuation, and one spouse left that business, and then they had tax issues because they were trying to do estate planning. So it's just an example of it can get messy when both spouses worked in the business. So coming to an
Sure.
agreement or just straight out selling is cleaner. But obviously, if this is your life's work and you're 40 years old and you don't want to sell it, you may be giving up significant other assets like retirement assets and house equity and other things. So you can buy out
For the balance piece, so you can keep going. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we had an interesting scenario like that where we were under contract with the engagement, I should say, with the sellers. Husband and wife started the business together. Here we are a couple years later. We bring it to market. We get some buyers. We've got offers on the table. And then it comes out that the husband and wife are now divorcing. And so we're like, okay, so what do you do with that? That's a marital property issue. And the wife, that attorney comes and says, you can't sell it because we don't agree with how much you're going to get for it, or we don't agree with what we're going to get, what she's going to get out of it. Okay.
Right.
So this goes on for over a year. And the seller, the husband says, listen, I want to sell it, but we're not going to be able to agree on what the price is. We had already done a valuation or a broker opinion of value, as I mentioned earlier. So they had a number, which at the time it was listed, they agreed on. Now that they're getting divorced, they don't agree on the number anymore. Okay. Yes. And so he says, look, I can't do anything. It's marital property. I got to wait. But what my intent is once we get through the divorce, whether he buys her out or she buys out or whatever the circumstance winds up being, he's anticipating he's going to buy her out. He's going to continue to run it for another year, build it up even higher, and then sell it. Well, here we are almost a year later. That hasn't happened, Kelly.
Right. The other thing you can do when one spouse is acting, I'm not going to say emotionally, but just not financially founded anymore. Based on the facts you just presented, they had already agreed on a sale price. If they were still married, they were the sale price is agreed. You'd done the valuation. That all makes sense. So the change would be evidence to show the judge unreasonability on the other side. You can argue to the judge that this business should be sold. So you don't have to just let the other side delay everything. You can show the urgency of bird in the hand, money now, actual payment, because you're working with Transworld and they can actually sell this business. Judge, give us whatever time frame you usually use. That would be reasonable. That would be very persuasive to a judge. I don't want it to sell him because it's so messy to try and divide a business that isn't sold. And if they don't have separate assets, if they don't have enough other assets, if the main assets of the business, there's no offset. And that's what happens when there's one main asset. Many courts will order its sale based on only one spouse requesting it, showing that the other side doesn't have a better solution.
Got it. So
and
there's no horse
I don't like the
trading
numbers, not a better solution.
Yeah, there's no horse trading that can happen because there's not equaling assets on the other side. So that makes it interesting. Well, geez, I wish you and I had this conversation a year
Absolutely.
or so ago.
And so that's why I do what I do.
Yes.
Because when these questions come up, let's see how it litigated. That's everything I speak about and teach professionally is how did it litigate? Plenty of people can tell you what they see in their business. I know more than any other lawyer because I've spent over 17 years reading thousands of these cases, but we can help prevent the scenario that you actually went through. This information, he and his lawyer could have gone to court and had a better chance at getting the judge to be on their side because courts are their judges are people who recognize selling now is probably better for this family than this valuation dispute. And how is he going to buy her out with what? And then paying her over time. Payment over time is something that's dangerous for anyone after divorce because there's no guarantee you're actually going to get paid unless you take certain steps. And so payment over time, anything that isn't actually divided on the date, by the date of divorce, creates risk for you and your spouse.
Okay. And so the valuation evidence we talked about, for example, business appraisals, okay, of
Yes.
a CVA, a certified valuation, or a broker opinion of value. But they're going to look at what other documentation, like what's the stuff that they're concerned with seeing the most? Tax returns?
Well, okay, so tax returns, that sounds like great evidence, but everybody knows there's some creativity with businesses and tax returns. Yes,
Fair.
you obviously the other side is going to ask if you control the business, the other side is going to ask you in discovery to give all of the business tax returns and all that, and you have to, otherwise you will be in trouble with the court. So you
Okay.
give all that evidence, they're going to go through it. And if they need to, they'll get an accountant or a business valuator to look for what has not been done correctly, either
Yeah.
unintentionally or intentionally. And there's something else I want to talk about. Plenty of folks who own a business have some expenses through the business.
Right.
So your car is leased for the business because that's great for taxes, your cell phone, anything like that probably becomes imputed income for purposes of calculating support. So when your personal expenses are provided by the company, that means you have more disposable income available than you otherwise would have because you're not paying for the car and you're not paying for whatever else the business is paying for.
Right.
And that it's called imputed income. That will actually increase the amount the court uses to calculate, for example, child support. Child support's based on guidelines up to a certain annual amount of income. And so your amount on the guideline, you would go up. And so the child support would go up based on that. So just be prepared for these perks that you have through your business. They may become imputed income because you're not using disposable income to pay for them.
Yeah, and that's the add back battle, because we add back pretty aggressively on certain pieces of it, whether it's an officer's salary or the auto expense, insurance, there's other perks. And maybe that's one of the benefits of folks being in business for themselves in the country is there are things that you can legitimately be able to do that.
Absolutely.
That's between you and your tax professional. But It sounds like they're going to get scrutinized really, really closely if you're in the divorce piece of it.
Right. And so, yes, they obviously will ask for tax returns and profit and loss statements and other things to see where you are in the business and then go on from there.
Got it. So from a timing perspective, the best time to get a valuation is before you're going to do the divorce. And what I think I've heard us say is, if I guess it's probably 50-50 of the time, people start selling a business and then during that process, the divorce comes up. As opposed to people who are like, we have this business, we're thinking about separating, you keep the house, I'll keep the business. Like that conversation, it sounds like what I hear you saying is, hey, if you can come to an agreement here and then, work out what the way forward is, that's a better position to be in than trying to then figure out a value because you guys have now decided we need to split, we need to figure out how much this thing is worth, because they may or may not actually wind up agreeing on that amount.
Right. And then the costs of fighting, the costs of gathering that evidence and evaluating it. And that's an argument to use with the other side to say, okay, let's look at both of our costs. Do we want to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on experts and lawyers fighting versus what if the business is worth $200,000? Do you want to spend $75,000 to $100,000 total arguing about it? You
and
both get less. So early on, there's an opportunity for mediation. And this is where being a strategy is to be forthcoming with the documentation instead of fighting. Because the court's going to force you to provide that financial information on the business anyway. You're not going to get away with hiding it. And you lose credibility with the judge. And you don't want to lose credibility with the judge because on any asset, I didn't mention this before, but on any asset, the owner can testify in court as to value. Doesn't mean the judge is going to give it a lot of weight, but you can testify to the value of your house, the value of your business. And sometimes that may be the only evidence in the record, and then the court can rely on that. So you want to maintain credibility and you want to maintain reasonability. You ask for it, sure, here it is. If I know I have to give it, why not just present it? And then mediation early on before things get acrimonious and difficult and emotional, worse.
Yeah, right.
That's the time, the scenario you just presented, people could come to that agreement. And just thinking about the costs you're saving, legal fees and financial expertise fees. And if it needs to be sold, that's the best evidence.
Right. Right. So if someone's considering they're business owners now and they're facing a divorce, pieces of advice that we'd give them. One, clean up your books now, which you should do whether you're getting divorced or not. Okay.
We
'Cause
hope
if
you're
gonna,
doing that.
yeah, if you're going to bring the business to market, you're going to wind up with buyers, or in this case, attorneys who are looking and scrutinizing every single thing. So get the books of clean now. If it's a questionable add back, then reconsider it. Do you even want to bring it up? That happens on a regular business sale. I'm sure it's going to get scrutinized under the microscope in the divorce piece, because the seeds of inconsistency, they grow wildly in court too. They probably become even more magnified, I would imagine.
Right, because they're looking for that nefarious angle.
Yeah, right. Sure. Buy out your ex-spouse. If there's a way to do it, do that early. That you and mediation, let's agree. Listen, we think it's worth this. I'll give you X. You keep the house and the car, whatever. Let's try and agree to disagree agreeably. I don't know how they say that. Yeah. So everybody kind of gets
to compromise. It's a compromise.
Yeah, good word.
Where neither one has to take out a loan, because if the other spouse is keeping the house and your house has appreciated, like many have, so you've been in it for 10 years, you've got a low interest rate and a lot of equity, the spouse keeping the house now has to get a loan and add to the debt load in order to buy you out, only using that asset. So this offset concept really could play to your advantage and mean you don't have to get a loan to buy out the other spouse's interest in the business, and she doesn't have to get a loan to buy out your interest in the house.
Right. Because the valuation then becomes more of a negotiation if you're in that spot. So clean up your books now. Maybe you can figure out a way to get out. Maybe you can buy out your spouse. You could sell it, agree on what the price is, split the proceeds. That's probably the cleanest of the breaks, is what it sounds like.
And judges love that. The sale is the fair market value.
Right. And so it's now been determined, and it wasn't determined by an expert. It's determined by what a buyer would pay and what a seller would accept. And there's the number that everybody agrees on.
And you would net more. I mean, the argument for the other spouse who may not be on board is we will net more if we don't litigate this, if we don't argue about this and use our team, and we have to pay their legal fees and their finance consulting fees. If we save all of that, we net more just by selling it and going through a traditional sales process like Transworld handles.
Well, that makes a lot more sense. And, people don't always think logically, unfortunately, when they're in the divorce scenario. Emotions are high. You may want to stick it to the other person. There's other motives there.
Yes, there is a matrix of emotion, but we need to, what I've always taught is anyone going through a divorce needs to treat it like a business transaction, all assets and all aspects, get the emotion out and just look at it, look at the numbers and look at where you want to be afterwards and really look at your net, and net includes the costs of the divorce.
Yes. Because that's you don't get to keep all that money because you got to take all those costs out of it. Yeah, that's tough. The sale is better. The divorce is not good. In a sale, we're selling the goodwill of the business, what makes the business valuable. In a divorce, personal goodwill is coming out. Is it excluded?
Well, that's litigated mainly in medical practices. And so, and I've seen cases where it's not counted towards valuation.
Okay.
And also in businesses where you are the business, you personally, and so your removal would change the value.
Yeah. And that always hurts us in a regular business or a regular sale anyway. We work really hard with the sellers to go, look, you need to replace yourself. Because from a buyer's perspective, if Kelly is the business and Kelly leaves, what do I got left here? And so that would seem to be the same in this scenario as well. So
yes, courts can be reasonable based on how the business selling and buying in actually works would resonate with the judge. So
right. And what do you think about the prenups thought process there? There's a lot of people, that was a very popular thing, especially in the bigger, the bigger realms, sports figures and people who own big companies is that something that most people should consider if they're in business with a partner or with their spouse?
If you have a business before getting married, a prenup and especially if it's a second marriage or a third marriage, which happens for some people.
Sure.
Protecting your premarital assets makes sense. It's not I only sort of want to marry you. It makes a lot of sense. And if you have children from a previous relationship and all of that. You're protecting the folks you want to protect before you get married. So a prenuptial, and there's also a postnuptial. Now, a postnuptial agreement would be you're already married, and that is scrutinized even more. And then your estate planning. So those are the three things that are very common, and businesses are usually part of that equation.
Well, prenups aren't romantic, but neither is fighting over business valuation in a courtroom. So neither of those are things that people are looking forward to. But I think that really helps, everybody going in at that point, then understanding, hey, this is what we're agreeing from the beginning. And that could eliminate, if it ever came to it down the road, any kind of difficulty that might come through this whole process. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, is there any other key point or last piece of advice that you'd want to give someone who is a business owner and they're in this scenario where they're thinking about getting divorced, they're already in the process of getting divorced? What do they need to take away, Kelly?
I would say two things. If you have a business, you really do need a lawyer in your divorce, because I've seen cases where they're spending money on appeal because they divorced without a lawyer and they had a business. If you have a business worth hundreds of thousands of dollars and a house with equity worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, add it all up and then decide, am I willing to not ever get that money? Because a property division agreement is binding, but if you don't have the enforcement mechanisms, you may not ultimately receive what you're supposed to. So it's really important with business and other high value assets to get the legal advice first, and then second, the business advice, and decide, all right, what are the documents I have now? What else do I need to defend my valuation of this business?
Good. Well, it's not something that you wish on anybody, but 50% of marriages today are ending that way. And that means a lot of folks that we work with who are business owners, at some point, this could be part of what they face, either before deciding to sell or while they're selling. It comes up, and there's some good strategies and takeaways from today's episode. So thank you for giving us your expertise, Kelly. It's very, very much appreciated.
Thank you, JT.
Yeah. And reminder, everybody, look, every business has a story, and every divorce, including a business, has two. Her side, his side, or the opposing sides. But if you're in that scenario and you need assistance, Kelly, how can someone get in touch with you to take this a little bit further, whether they have counsel already or they don't? What's the best contact details for you?
So the best way to contact me is wealthlitigated.com, and that's a podcast, and all my other contact is on that website. But that's a place to go to listen to get a drill down on a specific case. So we've been talking about the principles from a lot of cases, but it's really interesting just to hear the soap opera facts of what gets litigated, and then to see and to get a sense of how it works in the system. And so it could be businesses put in a trust. How does that work in the divorce? Because divorce is really the stress test of the other systems you have in place.
And give me that podcast name one more time.
Sure. It's wealthlitigated.com.
Wealthlitigated.com. That'll be in the show notes as well. If anybody would like to reach out to Kelly Lise Murray and find out a little bit more, that's the way to do it. Thanks for being a part of the podcast today again, Kelly. And thank you to each of you who are listeners. Whether you're looking to sell, buy, or franchise your company, you've come to the right place when you're working with Transworld. Thanks for being a part of the Deal Board today.
Thank you.
Need help buying or selling a business? Transworld has over 1,000 brokers in 250 offices worldwide. Visit tworld.com or call 800-205-7605.
Hey, JT, do you know what time it is?
Money time?
Almost. It's time for Listing of the Week.
Welcome to Listing of the Week. We currently have a book of business in the healthcare industry. This agent's book of business is basically coming in from Medicare Advantage plans. This is reoccurring business coming in from United, Humana, Freedom, and Aetna. This is an insurance agency that is currently listed for $415,000 in the Central Florida area. We've got our 2025 numbers pulled directly off his 1099s from the insurance carriers directly. This is a great opportunity for an insurance agent or agency to expand and grow its footprint here in the Central Florida area. If you'd like to get a hold of me in regards to this listing, please call 321-299-6867 or chip at tworld.com. I'm Chip out of Central Florida. Back to you guys at the Deal Board.
Hey, Andy, do you know what time it is?
What time?
It's time for Deal of the Week.
Ring the bell.
Hi, everybody. Marty Fishman, Transworld Business Advisors, Fort Lauderdale. And I wanted to share with you about a recent sold. It was a management consultant business that I listed over 2 years ago. This management consulting business, established for over 20 years. It had renewing contracts, a recurring revenue model. It had clients all over the country. It was a real growth industry. Industry itself was growing. The seller's financials were growing. The business was a little dependent upon the seller, but still it was transferable to a buyer with the right skills, and it did need an owner-operator to replace the seller. In fact, the seller was good with staying on for post-closing to help a buyer with transition. They also had a lot of support staff. We had hundreds of NDAs on this business, and we had multiple LOIs. So we first got together with a private equity group who had put in an offer, an LOI, that was acceptable to the sellers, and we got into due diligence. Due diligence was intense and long, and it was so intense and long, the deal died because the buyer tried to retrade the deal. We then remarketed and again found a number of buyers, multiple LOIs, found some people that were in the space already, but their offers weren't to the seller's liking. We found a buyer, an independent buyer, who was young and smart and hardworking. We interviewed this buyer. The sellers liked the buyer. We got into a deal at full sale price. Due diligence was very intense. The SBA underwriting process, very intense. But the buyer and the seller liked each other, very courteous, very respectful of each other. And after 4 months of due diligence and SBA underwriting, we had a successful sale for $2.2 million. Once again, we got the seller the listed sale price. He was very happy. It's going to be a good deal for good people.
Thanks for tuning in to the show today. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends on social media. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcasting app. If you have questions, would like to appear, or have suggestions for topics for the show, get in contact with us through our website, thedealboardpodcast.com.